We're ready to get started. Danny had me all distracted over there. So it's good to be here tonight. Good to have everyone here in person and also those that are coming in over the internet. Appreciate Tony taking care of things last Wednesday for me and taking care of that dung gate. So made a joke, told him I was going to leave that one to him, and he handled it. He handled it thoroughly too, and I really do appreciate that. So anybody, anything we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks, anything maybe you remember from Tony or maybe the week before that? Not about as bad as some teenagers. I tell you what, you ask them a question, they all get silent.
I think the perfume workers did the dung gate.
Don't know that that's in the Bible. But that
was not a voluntary position.
Yeah. Well, I don't think he nominated most people to tell them where they needed to be. We as much as leaders would like to do it by themselves, they can't do everything by themselves. It takes a lot of help, and certainly I am thankful for the people here at Fellowship that serve in ministry. Many of them I've served with when I was here the first time, and they continue serving. I just thank you for that, and also the new ones that I've met that are in ministry serving. It makes it easy when you got a lot of help. So, but Nehemiah, he did use just about everybody, right? He used the perfume makers, he used the gold makers, men, women, children. It mentions daughters in there. All except for that one group of nobles, right? And we don't know exactly why they did not contribute. Maybe they had something going on with Sanballat and Tobiah. Maybe we looked at some verses pertaining to that. But you know what? That's the way it is in ministry. In ministry, you're never going to get everybody on board. You just got to kind of go with who you got, move with the movers, as they say. We began looking at the gates a couple weeks ago, and then Tony picked it up last week. So just going to kind of dive into that. I'm not going to talk a lot about the dung gate since Tony took care of that one for me. But we're going to look at some of these other gates in the rest of chapter 3. We're going to finish out chapter 3 tonight, but we're not going to read all of chapter 3. And once again, I apologize for me having to pronounce these names. Certainly if anybody else would like to try it, they're welcome to it. So let's begin reading Nehemiah chapter 3, beginning in verse 14. And Malchijah, the son of Rechab, the leader of the district of Beth-Harkiam, repaired the refuse gate. Dung gate. He built it and hung its doors with its bolts and bars. Shalom, the son of Koazeh, the leader of the district of Mitzpah, repaired the fountain gate. He built it, covered it, hung its doors with its bolts, and prepared the wall of the pool of Shalom by the king's garden as far as the stairs that go down from the city of David. Both the refuse gate or dung gate that Tony talked about last week and this fountain gate were considered southern gates, even though the refuse gate was the one on the southern wall. The fountain gate was on the southernmost part of the eastern wall, so it's still considered one of the southern gates. As Tony mentioned last week, some gates are more fun to work at than others, or maybe a little bit more enjoyable. The way he described the dung gate, it's certainly not a place that I would want to work. But then as we're going to look at the fountain gate a little bit more tonight, you'll see that the fountain gate is probably a whole lot nicer place to work. And that just kind of reminded me, in ministry and in service, there's sometimes you're called to serve in areas that you're not exactly excited about, right? Maybe not something that's you're really looking forward to doing, but certainly, God calls us to do those things as well. And never in ministry should we look at something and say, you know what, that's below me. Imagine if Nehemiah would have delegated some people over to the dung gate, and they're like, nuh-uh. You know what I mean? You can forget that, right? It says more about our heart, doesn't it? Certainly there are areas that we're called to work that are a little bit more enjoyable than others. As Tony talked about the other night, the dung gate, that's where they carried out all the garbage, right? And Tony talked about the fire that burned there and the way that was likened into the lake of fire. Jeremiah, they tossed the garbage there into the Hinnom Valley, as Tony mentioned the other day. Jeremiah called the Hinnom Valley the Valley of Slaughter. And that's where a lot of the worship of Molech went on. Does anybody remember what I said about Molech? What was the god of Molech known for? Do what? Child sacrifice, right? I mean, even that fact alone, you know what I mean, would not want me to want to be over there working on that part of the gate. Moving on to the fountain gate. Those that got called to work on the fountain gate or got delegated to work on the fountain gate were probably a lot more, I don't want to say a lot more blessed, but a lot more fortunate maybe than those that had got assigned the dung gate. Certainly the fountain gate was in sharp contrast to the dung gate. That was the gate from which the path to one of the wells went to that they would pull water from. In Bible days, people didn't have wells at their homes like we have today. You know, most time you either have city water or you've got well water. Most time you have a well assigned to your house. We're looking at moving to this neighborhood over here, and they have a community well. That's kind of new to us. But even when we think about wells today, they're a lot different than the wells were in that day. I mean, you can think a well on our property, we got an electric pump that goes down in the ground there and pumps the water out. We cut the spigot on, we got water, right? That was not the case with these wells. A lot of these wells were sort of they were like I can't think of the word now. Cistern, and they're like a lighthouse, only reversed. It's like an inverted lighthouse. You know, you go in a lighthouse and there's all the steps going up on the inside of it, and you get taller and taller, right? Well, these wells in that day were like a lighthouse in the ground. So it still had all the steps, but they went around on the inside and went down in the ground. So, I mean, it was a job to go fetch water out of this well. And how much did people need water every day, right? So they had to be able to go get that water. So maybe if you were living at close to one of these water gates, maybe that was the high rent district. I don't know. So the convenience of being close to the water there. Not only did Nehemiah commission the work on the fountain gate, but he also commissioned the work on the pool of Siloam. And your translation may read a different word there, Shelah, Siloam. It's the same word there. We see this pool of Siloam mentioned in the Gospel of John. I'm going to read that. You don't need to flip to it tonight. This is kind of a familiar story. John chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. And it says, "Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?' Jesus answered, 'Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but the works of God should be revealed in him.'" We talked about that a couple of weeks. Well, it's been maybe a month or two ago in our Sunday night discussion, how bad things happen in life so that God may be glorified. Certainly this was an example here. Verse 4, Jesus says, "I must work the works of him who sent me while it is a day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." I'm praying and studying, kind of give you guys a heads up. After Easter, I want to focus on these I am statements of Jesus Christ. So that's kind of where I'm looking. As Lord willing, that's where we're going to go on Sunday mornings. So you guys be praying as I'm preparing and studying for those sermons. But here's one: I am the light of the world. When Jesus had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. He said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which is translated "sent." So he went and washed and came back seeing. So that was this pool of Siloam that we're reading about, that Nehemiah has commissioned to rebuild. Not only did you have the pool of Siloam here, but you also had the king's royal garden was just inside the city wall there. Melody, did you get that picture? Have we already moved through that picture of the city wall with the pool of Siloam and all that stuff? Have we already skipped through that? Okay, well, we'll get to it here in a minute. But you'll see this pool of Siloam, the king's garden, it's labeled on that chart. And all those things were within the city wall. So Nehemiah commissioned the builders not only to fix the wall and to fix the gates, but to repair this pool, to work on the steps that went down to the old city of David where the gardens extended. You see, Nehemiah wasn't just rebuilding the walls, and he wasn't just rebuilding the gates. He was also trying to restore some of the beauty to God's city by making sure that this pool of Siloam was worked on, that the gardens were worked on. You know, that's we've been talking about how the leadership of Nehemiah through the book of Nehemiah, and we're going to continue to reference that and see that as we go through it. But you know, that's a good characteristic of a leader. A leader goes beyond what is necessary, right? And that's what Nehemiah is doing here. You know, it wasn't necessary that the pool of Siloam or the garden steps or anything like that be renewed for protection, but he was trying to beautify God's city and restore it to its beauty. You know, and good leaders are not satisfied with what is expected. They want the best, and they want to do their best work. And certainly, we're told in Scripture that we're to do all things as unto the Lord. And I talk to teenagers, and you know, for many years, and I tell them, I say, listen, you know, when you study for that test, when you write that paper, you got to do your best. Do it as unto the Lord, right? And it's like, wow, it's a whole nother thing right there. It takes it to a whole nother level, right? But the same analogy works for us as adults. You know, when we're to be doing stuff, we're to be doing it as unto the Lord. We're to be doing our best, whether it be working for someone or doing some sort of ministry here around the church. We are to do our best as if we are doing it unto the Lord. Nehemiah continues to move counterclockwise to the eastern wall. On the eastern wall, there were 4 gates. There was the water gate, the horse gate. If Tyler was here this evening, I'd ask him, what did you go to buy at the horse gate? You did not go to the horse gate to buy a horse, believe it or not. The sheep gate, you went to go buy what? Sheep. Fish gate, you went to go buy what? All right. What did you go buy at the horse gate? You didn't buy a horse at the horse gate, all right? We're going to talk about that here in a minute. But we had the water gate, the horse gate, the eastern gate, and the Mifkad gate. As Tony mentioned the other week, you know, a lot of these gates did not need repair because it doesn't say that they repaired them. Nehemiah gave very specific instructions as to which gates needed to be repaired. These were maybe still in good shape and good condition. I'm sure that they were, but there were still a lot of walls between these gates that I mentioned that needed repair. I'm not gonna read verses 16 through 25 or so tonight. If you want to go home and read that section of it, feel free to do that. I was not going to try to struggle through all of those names tonight, but there is some applications there. Time and time again in these verses, you'll see that they worked at their homes. And remember how I talked about that was very important because if I am building a wall of protection to protect the city and protect what is inside that wall, and if I am working close to my house, then I'm going to make sure that wall is what? That it's strong, that it's secure, right? Because that's where my family is. My family's on the other side of that wall. So Nehemiah was smart in having people work where they lived. Would have motivated them to do a good job. Let's continue reading there. Skip down to verse 26. Moreover, the Nethinim who dwelt in Ophel made repairs as far as the place in front of the water gate toward the east and on the projecting tower. And after then, the Tekoites repaired another section. Remember, we talked about those Tekoite nobles, right? They didn't do a whole lot of work, but these Tekoites, whoever they were, they completed theirs and also completed this section right here. It says, after them, the Tekoites repaired another section next to the great projecting tower, and as far as the wall of Ophel. Beyond the horse gate, the priest made repairs, each in front of his own house. The water gate that we see mentioned here would be another place where they would have traveled to get a second source of fresh water from the Gihon spring there on the east side of Jerusalem. Some of the water, you didn't have to go very far to get it. They brought it in with aqueducts, and I think Melody has a picture of that for us. So basically, they would just use gravity to bring the water from a location that was close by, and they would bring it into the city where they would sort of divide it up. And there's a picture of one of these aqueduct bridges there. They're all over the internet. But I knew aqueducts water, but I wasn't quite sure how they did it. If I had known, I'd forgotten about it. But this was kind of an aqueduct, another way in which they would have gotten the water to where the people needed it. And then we see the horse gate stood facing the Kidron Valley. Many scholars believe that this was used for palace traffic. So, you think of fish gate, you think of fish, you think of sheep gate, you think of sheep. You think of horse gate, you want to think of palace traffic. This would have been a royal entrance to the city. It would have been used for official business. If they were going out into war, they would have rode out through this horse gate, riding horses in times of war. Let's continue reading there in verse 29. After them, the Zodok, the son of Immer, made repairs in front of his own house. We see that again. After him, Shemaiah, the son of Shenakah, the keeper of the east gate, made repairs. After him, Hananiah, the son of Shemaiah, the Hanan, the sixth of Zalaph. They really challenged me in that verse. Repaired another section. After that, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, made repairs in front of his own dwelling. After Malchijah, one of the goldsmiths, made repairs. Tommy mentioned that. He mentioned the perfume makers. We have the goldsmiths here. Made repairs as far as the house of Netham and of the merchants in front of the Mifkad gate, and as far as the upper room at the corner. And between the upper room at the corner, as far as the sheep gate, the goldsmiths and the merchants made repairs. So once again, we started with the sheep gate, and we sort of came full circle back around to the sheep gate. This eastern gate was close to the temple area. It was known as a sacred gate. And Ezekiel prophesied, if you were to look, we're not going to flip over there tonight, but if you look at Ezekiel chapter 44, verses 1 and 2, Ezekiel prophesied that the Son of Man would pass through this gate and that it would be sealed shut. Jesus passed through this gate during his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, which we're going to look at here in a couple of weeks on a Sunday morning. This eastern gate was sealed shut by Sultan the Suleiman in 1543 and is still shut. Now, to try to prevent the return of the Messiah, many people believing the Messiah is going to come through this gate, there is actually a Muslim cemetery blocking this gate now. Some believe, like I said, Jesus is going to return through this gate. I don't know that that's necessarily true, but nothing is going to stop the return of Jesus Christ. When he gets ready to return, he's going to return regardless of anything that we do. And we know that when Jesus calls us up in the rapture, right, we're going to meet him in the clouds. That's not the second coming. The second coming is when Christ actually comes to earth to set up his kingdom. We have mention here of this Mifkad gate, which was probably either an inspection station or a place for travelers to enter Jerusalem. Most likely he assigned these vendors here because this Mifkad gate would have been the marketplace. So once again, encouraging people, assigning people to work in areas that they had a connection to. If they were going to be working and ministering and selling things in this gate, then that would be a good place for them to work. Have just a few things by way of application tonight. In chapter 3 here, we see 38 individuals listed representing 42 different people. Now, what do we know about these people? We don't have a whole lot spelled out for us in the Scripture about these people. We know that they were workers, right? We know that they did their part. We don't read about any grumbling or complaining or anything like this. But this chapter sort of focuses in on all of these workers and the work that they had done. Nehemiah listed many people here, but you know who Nehemiah doesn't give any credit to? Himself. Exactly. That's another great characteristic of a leader. You could tell a bad leader when they always desire to be seen. They got to be up there in front of people. They won't get credit for everything. But Nehemiah was not that kind of person. We do see a Nehemiah listed here in chapter 3, but it is not him. Good leaders seek to get the job done and to get it done well. They don't seek after credit. We don't know a whole lot about these people, but certainly God does. Many times we serve in ministry, we serve in churches. Maybe you even serve in your community, your neighborhood. Maybe there's a ministry that you have in your neighborhood that maybe won't be publicized, in a church bulletin or anything like that. You won't be on a sign in that committee, but you have a ministry there, and you may not ever get noticed for that ministry. There's a lot of things that go on in our church that people don't see happening. They happen during the week and they happen after hours, and people don't see those things. So there's not going to be any reward there. There's not going to be any recognition there. But the truth of the matter is, though we may not necessarily know who these people are, though we may not necessarily know all the ministries that go on in our church and in our community, God knows those people. God knows those that are ministering. He knows those that are truly serving Him with the kind of heart that we see in these people. And God is going to recognize them. He is going to reward them for their ministry and what they have done. I try not to call names out from the pulpit, because sure enough, if I was to go listing those working in VBS, I'd miss somebody's name, right? But God is not going to miss anyone's name. He's not going to fail to recognize or reward us for our service to Him. So next week, we're going to continue here in chapter 4. The plan is next week to look at the first 6 verses here. So if you want to read ahead there in chapter 4, that's where we'll be next week. We'll see 2 of those guys, Sanballat and Tobiah. We'll see that they are back again, causing problems and causing opposition. And once again, we just have to take pleasure in the fact that when we get busy about doing God's work, there's going to be opposition, right? Had Nehemiah been doing this and he had no opposition, he might begin to think, hey, maybe this isn't what God has called me to do. But certainly, anytime we're trying to do something for the Lord, we're going to have opposition. And these guys continue to give Nehemiah a hard time. I don't know if it's in chapter 4 or later on in this book, but one of the things that really jumps out to me about this story is, they're over there harassing Nehemiah for building the walls. And he goes, what? Basically, it's a waste of time for me to come down here and deal with you guys. You know what I mean? God's got a great work for me to do here. That's something we've got to remember in ministry as well. Don't allow negative Nancy's and stuff to discourage you from the work that God is doing. Don't allow them to pull you away. We were at that conference last week, and I really appreciate the church and giving us the time to go there and do that and be challenged. But one of the speakers was talking about, and I shared this with a couple of the men at the work day the other day. You're doing a work for God, and you know that you're following after God. You're growing your spiritual life, and you got these little people that want to come along and argue with you and try to tear you down. And certainly you could argue back with them and probably beat them, right? But what's the point? This speaker said that a bulldog can whoop a skunk, but it ain't worth it. So just keep that in mind. You know what I mean? Some fights that you can win, some battles and arguments that you can win, they just really ain't worth taking on. So if you remember that, I think it'll help you in ministry and encourage you as you're serving. So any questions or comments about something tonight? Something I didn't hit on? Something jumped out on you? You're like, Pastor Dave, I think you just totally blew it on that one. Totally misinterpreted that. Anybody? Yes?
With that image, why is it so narrow and long?
That's all the images of it. That's the way it laid out. Everyone that I saw with the gates had it down there, and the little pool of Shalom and the king's garden and all that stuff was down that little bitty. I don't know if it was like just a pretty place to to go and be, but that was all down in that lower side. But it all kind of tapered like that. Why the walls were built like that, I don't know. I don't I don't think this has that broad wall that I talked about the other week that the archaeologists found. I think it was like 23 feet wide, maybe, and 80 feet long. I think, if I remember right, that was the broad wall. And I think Tony hit on it the other night. 40 feet tall were most of the walls.
In Nehemiah's time, this is what it looked like. It does on throughout the Bible. It gets reshaped.
Yeah.
This is just a graph, this is not a real image.
Oh yeah, it's not a. Yeah, you're right.
It
Yeah.
does show the similarity of Nehemiah's day.
Yeah. You go home and search it and Google it. There's lots of pictures on the internet. Me and Melly looked at a lot of them. Tony had to challenge me to step my game up. He put a picture. You put one up, or I had to step my game up. Tony's challenging me. He's elevating me, right? Good stuff. So now don't expect pictures every single Wednesday night, okay? Anybody else? Appreciate all you being here tonight. We're going to move into our prayer time tonight. Certainly there's quite a few prayer requests that I have here. Remember the Gray family? That funeral was on Friday.